We're making these decisions for some specific reasons. We make every decision really with the long-term health of Xbox in mind. And what happens when an industry doesn't grow?
Microsoft cutting almost 2,000 jobs at Activision Blizzard.
But in no way were we alone in that.
Just this week, the video game streaming site Twitch announced 500 job cuts, and software company Unity said it's cutting 1,800, a quarter of its workforce.
And this ambition kind of also drove us to kind of try things that maybe we shouldn't try.
And so I think that just shows you that we got inefficient.
The workers, the people who are actually doing the day-to-day work of developing the games, they are laid off.
I might get the email saying like, no, we no longer need you.
Today's your last day, goodbye.
Not a stable industry wherever you go, whether it's AAA or even in indie spaces.
Boy, do we have a show for you.
Hello, thanks for tuning in. My name is Perry, and this is Played Off. It's an interview series with those affected by the layoffs in the games industry. Joining me today, James Bartholomeou, a public relations freelancer in the games industry. James, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Perry. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you the last couple of weeks to get this laid off. I knew said laid off. Get this.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for being on, and thanks for being flexible and working with me. I'm sure the accent gives it away that you're located in the in the UK, and I'm not there, and so it's been fun.
Time zone troubles.
Oh yeah, but we got it organized for sure. Mm-hmm. So James, you have worked at Thunderful Games, Ico, Focus Home Interactive. You've worked at a lot of different places, and I want to call out a couple of the titles that you've worked on or helped ship, like Viewfinder, Somerville. You worked alongside Hasbro with Magic the Gathering, D&D, Chicory, Tunic, slightly Baldur's Gate 3. There is no get. It's a pretty extensive list we were talking about before airing. I want to take a step earlier in the James's life and talk about, hey, what got you into working in the video game industry? Was it a specific game that kind of launched you to have a drive in the career, or was it kind of just what made sense for you?
Gosh, it's difficult. Like, all I have ever really, my only hobby ever has really been video games, right? I think it's a story for hundreds of people that work in the industry. It's like, so like one of the first games I remember playing is like Richard Scarry's Busy Town. I don't know if that was a game you guys had in the US. I mean, it must be. I think it's a US franchise.
Yeah, I know Richard Scarry. I don't know if I came across that specific game, but yeah, Lonely
Richard
Worm.
Scarry's Busy Town and Richard Scarry's How Stuff Worked. How It Works. Whichever. I like some of like things I could like. Is the first games I can remember playing, but like my whole life I've just always been enamored with video games. I remember, my parents coming home and seeing like a Game Boy Color. No. Would have been Game Boy Advances with like Pokemon Gold and Pokemon Silver for me and my little brother. I remember getting a Game Boy Advance SP for Christmas. But like, yeah, my whole life has been playing video games. Like I started playing World of Warcraft when I was in 2009. When I was 15. And like I met my partner through World of Warcraft. I'm a big Star Wars fan. I remember like getting Rogue Squadron, the PC Nintendo 64 game when I was like 6 years old, and having a folder on my desktop that spelled Rogue Squadron incorrectly. It's like Rouge Squadron. And just like I have always loved video games, and when I was working in college, or right before college, I was like, oh, maybe I'll be an actor, maybe I'll be. But then I realized that like, no, what I really like doing is like talking about video games. Went to college for journalism and PR because I was like, why do one degree when you can do 2 degrees? And in college, I realized I don't really have the. I really like talking about games, but I don't like writing about. I don't like writing. Oh no, that's not true. I do like writing. I don't like writing to a deadline. And when you're a journalist, it turns out deadlines are really, really important.
Yeah.
And so it's like I kind of pivoted to wanting to work in PR. And during college, I ran. I think lots of people do they run an indie games website and they write some blogs. They do streaming, and they're on Twitch. And then just after college, I applied to work at Green Man Gaming, who are a retail store in the UK. And I was there as a customer service person. And then they were like, oh, we need someone to help out with social media. And James has been here talking about ideas for like 6 months. Let's bring him over. And then, from there it's history basically. And that was 2025. No, not 2025. 2015. So it's coming up to being, my 10th year in games. And it's always been what made the most sense. Like my favorite thing in the world is talking to people about video games, and finding a place that I could do that, and then also support myself. Has always been the goal, I think.
And that's kind of the ideal track, is you find something you're passionate about, something you're good at, and being able to marry those two things. Work is always work. The expression, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. I don't necessarily subscribe to that, because work is work is work.
I kind of think that if you find something you love doing for work, that you'll work harder. And like I don't necessarily think it's a good thing. Oh no, that's not true. I do think it's a good thing to find work you love, but I also think it's like I certainly work way more hours than I should do because I like doing it. I could sit here and talk to you about games for hours and hours, and technically that's my job, right? If I'm here talking to you about a game I'm working on, that is me working, or if I could sit here and like work on a pitch deck, because like, oh, this is a cool idea, and 4 hours later at midnight, it's like, oh, I've been working for 16 hours.
If we spend the rest of the interview doing that, can you put those as billable hours? Can you get paid from this talk?
I would need to check my contract. I don't think so.
Okay.
I would need to check. No, maybe.
Okay.
Let me find out, then we can come back and
we'll find a way to get you a little something out of it.
Yeah.
So kind of that marriage of things you had studied, things you were good at, enjoyed doing, lands you in games. What is the first place kind of doing PR? Is it that Green
Man Gaming? No, the first place I was doing PR, I guess I was doing unofficial PR kind of at Focus Home Interactive, where I was a communications manager, and I worked on things like, Spin Tires, Mud Runner, or Farming Simulator, and that kind of thing. I was doing occasional hey, person to rock, paper, shotgun, you probably reached out to you by that PR team, but I wanted to make sure you saw this as well. But the first place I officially was hired to do PR was ICO Partners, which is a pan-European agency based in Brighton, and I joined them at the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, depending on when do you sign the contract, when do you start.
Gotcha. And we're talking about PR now. Like we talked before the show, do you mind explaining your role within PR, kind of, especially, sounds like you have a unique way of going about it. So I'm very interested to hear that.
I think so. PR for the layman is press relations, right? So you're, and I think people conflate with public relations, and I don't necessarily think that's true, because you aren't talking to the public, you're talking to press, and press talk to the public, and you can't control it. You can control what the press is saying, but you can't control it to a degree that it's press relations, and what that means is you're the person that is talking to the press. You are making sure they have what they need to cover your game. You are dealing with their complaints or their queries, and you're the person that is basically the press mouthpiece for a studio, or for a developer, or for a publisher, or for just one person, or for an event. I just finished doing some pro bono work for the Women in Games showcase, for example. And basically, your job is to build up contacts, build up rapport with press, and then when you have something that you'd like them to know about, you go and talk to them. My approach is very much making symbiotic relationships, being like, okay, this is the person I go to for when I think there is a cool roguelike, I have a person at this website that I go to and talk to. Or if I have an event that someone should be speaking about, like the in-game showcase which just happened, I want to go and talk to these 3 people, because they would find it interesting, they'd probably cover it. And it's very much about establishing relationships and finding the right person to speak to when you need something. Which sounds a bit manipulative, and I understand how it could be, and I try to approach it as a symbiotic thing. I need to get my clients or my projects coverage. Press need things to cover, right? And so you're finding the way to help them do that, and help everyone be in the right situation for a game. Does that answer the question?
It does, yeah. And maybe we can give it specific example too. We talked about the show, about you worked on Chicory, and I had said, hey, I listened to a lot of the Min-Max show, and Min-Max show talked about that a lot. And so you were absolutely doing your job right. But because I remember hearing Janet Garcia specifically really enjoyed Chicory. But what is the relationship kind of, we can talk about that specific situation, like do you reach out to Hansen at MinMax? Does Hansen reach out to you?
It really depends on who the journalist is and who you are as a PR person. I think like lots of PRs, they do blanket outreach, like you sort of mail merge and you send out an email to 100 people and it all goes out based on when you're sending out PR, if you're doing a review code campaign, and everyone does that. It's very routine for someone to say, okay, today is the day I'm blasting out an email saying requesting codes. Press know that audience is the best, and I think that the way that it works the best is for when I send out a press release saying, hey, just this game is releasing in 3 weeks, codes are now available, please sign up here. When the press come back to say, actually, this is a game that we think would be really good for us, can you cover it? And then that's when you do it. But also, it is your job to understand the press and understand the audiences. So I think it very much depends on how the person in the press works. Like I have been reaching out to PC Gamer the last week or so about a game that's just coming up, and they're incredibly busy. Everyone's incredibly busy in this industry. Right now it's GDC, it's PAX, it's the Future Game Show happened on Friday. There's just so much happening.
Right.
And like me spamming the press emails doesn't help. But you're hoping that someone is going to see that email and come back to you. But also depends on what the project is, who the press is, who the PR person is. But I like to reach out to everyone because I think it's a good way for you. It's proactive, right? Does that answer?
Yeah, it does, and it makes it pretty clear that, like you had said, you try and make it a symbiotic thing, and so a symbiotic relationship is going to look different depending on the parties involved. And so whether you're working with MinMax, with PC Gamer, with any of these outlets, the PR work that you're doing is absolutely going to differ between outlets. That just makes sense.
Yeah, like for example, if I'm reaching out to say, I am reaching out to MinMax, say, hey, actually we've got some guys content that doesn't work. They don't do guide content. They don't care about that, right?
Right.
They're a video platform. I'm not going to reach out to them and say, hey, do you want to? I've got some pieces that could be a good feature article here, and reach out to them. It's like, why are you reaching out to us about feature articles? Like we're a video-based platform, podcasts. It doesn't work. So it's about, it's about understanding how everyone works and how you can help them with what they need.
Absolutely.
And what they don't need as well is important to know.
Sometimes that's the more helpful side to look at. Like, what someone doesn't need can, a lot of the time, tell you a lot more about your involvement with them. To get back to the kind of work that you've done, let's zoom back in from generalized PR work, what are you doing, to some of the places you're at, ICO Partners, Thunderful Games. What does the work there look like? ICO, we had talked, you said, again, Magic the Gathering, D&D, Chicory, Tunic, Baldur's Gate 3 briefly, Thunderful is Viewfinder, Somerville.
Yeah, so I think the big distinction is that ICO Partners is a self-publishing agency. So they handle marketing, they handle public relations, they handle content creator management, all that kind of stuff, versus Thunderful were a publisher. And so at ICO, what I was doing was I was on the front lines talking to content creators, talking to press, drafting pitch decks, drafting response decks to briefs, all that kind of stuff, and being like the person who's like interfacing with the press, doing the work of like on the what I call like being a ground troop, because like, you're the person who's like in the front line saying like, okay, please cover this game, journalist. Whereas at Thunderful, I was a PR manager, and my job was managing the agency that they had. So it was a lot less on the ground. You still occasionally speak to press, but you're more worried about making sure that you understand what the company's looking for from your PR agency. You are working out what events you need to be at. You're working with your brand manager to work out timelines, all that kind of stuff. So really, kind of like the two sides of the same coin. So one person's one you're on the ground floor on the ground doing the interfacing the press, on the other you're kind of like more project management really than PR work, although you are still speaking to the press to a degree, understanding what is important about your game to get across. A bit more of a planning kind of role.
And how long are you at either of these places, at Thunderful, at ICO?
So I was at ICO from January 2019 until I left to join Thunderful at the end of May 2030. So just over 4 years.
Gotcha.
And then I was at Thunderful for 7 months, June until officially the end of February, but I left at the end of January.
Gotcha.
So 6 months, 7 months ish.
Maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but you left because layoffs were looming, or
I was laid off. So I was told, we found out on January 17th that were layoffs going to happen, and we all found out the same day. I remember it was January 17th. It's my little brother's birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. So I found out January 17th there was going to be layoffs happening. We found out the same time as the rest of the world, and I woke up to have met by like 20 DMs on Discord. Be like, hey James, I hope you're okay. And I was like, what the hell is going on? 2 weeks later, I found out that, you know, in the UK we do this thing called a consulting period, which is like you go into an interview with your managers and like kind of like defend your positions. Like you make a case for why they shouldn't lay you off and how you can like help them cut down cost and that kind of thing. So about 2 weeks later, he said, well, actually, as part of the consulting process, we've decided your position to be eliminated. And so that was January 31st, and then I was given a choice between staying there for a month and, you know, working my notice, or getting my notice paid out and just leaving. And I said, yeah, I'm going to leave. So I had I had like a month's notice paid out.
Now, is that something, and that's kind of what was confusing me about the January to February. Is that something that's more common within the UK, just a difference in labor laws? Is that a Thunderful specific thing? Because
that's a UK thing.
Okay.
So I know in the US, it's like, you know, it's at will. It's like if you can get laid off, you can just, you know, get kicked out, which sucks. And I think is vile, and I think that anyone that I have like severe sympathy for everyone that goes through that. In the UK, how I understand it, I'm not a labour lawyer.
Right.
This is my first time really going through this process. In the UK, kind of how it works is like you have so there's two things. You have, up until you've been at a company for 2 years in the UK, you can be, after you pass, you know, you usually do like a probationary period, and so it's about 6 months, 3 months, 6 months. And then you have up until you've worked at a place for 2 years, you can be let go for any reason. Then after you've been there for 2 years, you get protections and more like, you know, how I understand. And so really like the consultancy period for a role like mine, I'd only been there for 7 months. I didn't really need to go through that. They could just say, all right, you're gone, fine. But how the consultancy period works is basically you go into an interview with, you know, your boss and with an HR person. In fact, I think maybe it is in the US. Have you seen the film Office Space?
Once a couple of years ago, yeah.
In Office Space, there's a scene where main character, I'm trying to remember the actor's name, but he's talking to two people like, okay, let's consult with you about what you do here, how do you work, and you know, are you a middle manager, and that kind of thing, right? And so it's like kind of trying to understand what the position is, and is it essential, is it not essential, can it be cut, that kind of thing. I think that's basically how the consultancy period works in the UK, which is, you know, you are there trying to say, okay, this is what I do, this is what else I could do, this is how I could save the company money, this is what I propose. You kind of like make a proposal, which, to be completely honest, is kind of dehumanizing because, you know, you've been hired. Like, right. You're doing your job.
And then you have to go in and defend not just something that can be beneficial or detrimental to the company, but you are defending your livelihood to the company.
Yes. And you're also defending because decisions that you haven't made, you know, like it kind of sucks. And so basically that's how you do a proposal, and they go back and they talk about it and say, oh, actually, you know, we decided to do this, we decided to do that. And what they decided to do was, you know, cut my position. And, you know, and then after that, I spent about 3 weeks in a fugue state where I was staring at the ceiling. Yeah, I'd say, I think that's a good run through what the situation was. I can't really go into details about what the actual, like, why the layoffs happened. But that's kind of like what happened to me. And it wasn't just me that was laid off. It was myself. It was my colleague Helen, who was a senior social media manager. My colleague Luke, who was a senior community manager, and a whole bunch of other staff. I think when they put out the notice, they were saying like 125 people were being laid off, which was about a quarter of the company. There was 500 of us, so I guess a fifth of the company, which is not a small amount.
No, definitely impactful.
And the other thing, I'm not certain how much detail I can get into with this because it is I don't really understand it. But because Thunderful was a company that was based across the globe, you know, you had UK employment law, you had German employment law, you had Swedish employment law, And so it's very difficult for them to give us concrete information in meetings. But the whole team was there. It's like, you can say this, we can't say that. And so it's kind of like it was very difficult to understand the process. And it's kind of, because you're waiting so long to get information, it was like this weird, like, really bad feeling of limbo. Like, I almost wish that I'd said, hey, we're being laid off, you're gone today. Because then I would have known, as opposed to sitting there wondering what was happening. It was my 30th birthday. Like a week after I found out I was getting laid off. No, a month after I found out I was getting laid off. About 2 weeks after I officially did get laid off.
And you got
it wasn't how I wanted to spend my 30th birthday.
In that fugue state, yeah. Phenomenal. That is interesting because a lot of, I'll say, games discussion happens. You seem to have two hubs, of one being North America, the other being Japan, as far as games development goes. And so a lot of the news you'll hear about or how people are affected are focused on those two places. Japan has really good labor laws, and so it is hard for the news about layoffs to happen. And so primarily you're hearing about layoffs within North America or specifically the United States, how that's affecting. But it's important to remember, again, games are being developed across the world, and so I really do appreciate that perspective that you can bring to it as someone from the UK.
The UK, for all of its problems, you know, the classism and the transphobia and all that kind of thing, like, one of the things that we do right to a degree is labour laws, and I think that is why you don't hear as many layoffs here, is because it's a lot more difficult to lay people off here, for better or worse. I'm not an expert, I could be talking out my arse, but I think that's one of the reasons that you do hear about it a little bit less in Europe, is just because we have that little bit more, you know, unions are a bit more common, or, you know, we have a little bit more severance pay and that kind of thing.
Again, you mentioned that you had a notice period, which is something that American workers don't have. Can you dive into that a little bit more?
In my contract, I had a month notice period, and so, you know, it's like they have to give you a month's notice. Or I had to give them a month's notice. It's kind of like a mutually agreed period where, like, you say, oh, we're going to give you a month to, you know, get the final paycheck, or we're going to give you a month so you can help us wrap up, help you find your replacement, that kind of thing. And so under contract, they had to give me a month period, and I just said, you know, instead of giving me that month notice, I will leave now, and so you don't have to worry about me sabotaging things as a PR person. Just pay me what you would have paid me if I stayed. That was basically how that worked. And then also, you know, getting holiday paid out and that kind of thing.
And is that something that is pretty universal across UK employment?
Yes,
once you're
think
out
so.
of
Like,
that.
I've never encountered a place that doesn't have a notice period. I think it is something that you kind of you can negotiate, but I think in general, every place I've ever worked has had a month notice period.
Okay.
Actually, I think when I worked in France, I had like a 3-month notice period, maybe.
See, and again, that's
but I don't remember.
that's stunning to hear about. And again, I appreciate the perspective you can bring to this because, again, in America, we have a notice period, but it's the opposite. It's where the expectation is that you give your employer a notice when you are going to leave, but a lot of jobs here are at will. So there's that expectation. If you want to keep them for a reference for a future job, you'll give them 2 weeks, a month, a couple months notice that you're going to be leaving, but they can also shove you out the door at any time.
Yes. Yeah. And so you can't, I think you can do that in some places in the UK. Again, I'm not an employee. I'm not a legal expert. I've never worked like in office, in like storefront retail, that kind of thing. I do think that can happen in a few places, but in general, you have kind of like a mutually agreed notice period. Yeah.
That rocks. I want that over here. That'd be great.
Me too. I want that for everyone. Yeah.
I want to talk about, you know, you mentioned there's certain things that maybe we can't talk about with the reason the layoff happened, but I'd love to talk about what did that day look like for you?
Oh gosh, so at like 3 o'clock in the morning, because I don't sleep very well sometimes, and I saw a bunch of messages saying like, "Hey, are you okay?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know what's going on." I was at 3, and then I just kind of like laid there talking to people and trying to find out what was going on until about So I fell asleep again about 5:30, 6. Woke up at 7. It's like, okay, here's what's going on. And really, it was just kind of like a day of just like not really knowing what was going on. I know there was a meeting booked in for, I think, the next day. I think it was a Tuesday we found out there's a meeting on the Wednesday, but it would have been at like 4 in the morning, and so I didn't go to that because I'm not getting up at 4 in the morning to learn about a layoff. And I think the first thing that I actually heard, like concrete news, was the next Monday. And so really it was like a couple of days of just like not knowing what was going on, no work getting done, just kind of being in a kind of state of like confusion across the company, really, like just not knowing what was happening, not really being able, because you can't really do work when you don't know if you're going to still be at a company, because like I'm not going to build a plan if I'm not going to be here to make the plan. It was just kind of like a state of confusion, I think, is a good one.
And like you said, that lasted a couple weeks, just as you're waiting to hear specific communication from the company.
They like I said earlier, they were trying to make it so we only spoke, so they gave us all the information at the right time that would be like most appropriate to us. So it's like, they were going to talk to the UK employees this day and the German employees on that day, but it just kind of meant that we were just waiting to hear things. And it's not like it's like you hear in like US layoffs where they were like, oh, I was waiting to hear from my boss all day, and I found out that at like 5 p.m. I was been laid off, which is different. It was kind of like, here's like we're waiting like a drip feed of information, because it felt like nobody really knew what was happening, and it felt like the layoff news just kind of like blindsided everyone. I probably could have picked up on a few warning signs before the Christmas break, but there was nothing that I thought like, oh, they're going to lay off 125 people,
In talking with, the other people affected by the layoffs, this is a pretty recurring theme. Yeah, a gentleman I spoke with mentioned that he'd been specifically eyeballing the company he was laid off from because it seemed like the most secure thing. He looked at their track record, the games they shipped, thought it looked pretty damn secure, and then was laid off anyways. And a lot of warning signs are very easy to go unnoticed. Yeah. And
I think like every company has, there's issues like, maybe we spent too much money on that campaign, or maybe this could be organized better. And it's easy to be like, oh, well, that's, it's just how companies work. And I think that at certain points, like, because when I left ICO, I left right before Baldur's Gate 3 launched. Imagine how cool it'd be to say I was part of the launch team for Baldur's Gate 3. I'm credited on Baldur's Gate 3, and I did work on that game for like a year and change, but I missed out launching that game, and I left ICO to go and join what I was told was an exciting, up and coming, making changes company. And with hindsight, it makes you like, oh, was I an idiot for leaving the secure job to try and do this thing? This is a very dumb quote, but in January I started rereading the new Jedi Order, which is a Star Wars series. It's like 19 books long, and it is like the timing feels weird to me. But there's a quote in the second book from Wedge Antilles, who the commander of Rogue Squadron, and he says that a lot of the time, perfect hindsight is based on fantasy foresight. And that's the thing I've been trying to keep in mind the most, is that like, yes, I feel stupid for leaving the secure thing to go and join a company, but there's no way I could have known that. There's no way I could have known like the company was in a situation there's going to be layoffs happening. And while I do feel like I made a mistake, like there's no way I could have known I was making that mistake when I made that decision.
Right, you were doing the thing that at the time seemed like the best thing, the exciting thing.
Yeah, totally. The thing which paid me a lot more money as well. Which maybe I should have looked at that particular gift horse in the mouth a little bit more. I think a lot of the things that I struggled with in particular is like, so I, like lots of the people in the industry, I struggle with imposter syndrome. I struggle with anxiety. I struggle with depression, and like it's very difficult for me to be like, oh, what did I do wrong? What could I have personally done better to stop this situation from happening? And it's been a bit of a trying to figure out did I? What are my how have my personal failings contributed to this? And like, I think a lot of people are probably struggling with the same thing because or they're angry, and I wouldn't blame them for being angry. I certainly was and still am angry.
Right.
I think there's certainly like a lot of the people that I'm seeing talking about layoffs is like, I'm really angry, and I'm also really feeling betrayed because like, one of the things that I tell people about imposter syndrome, and like, I try and do a bit of mentoring, I try and do like, try and support people, because like I said, like, PR is about making networks and building relationships, and you don't do that just with press, you do it with other developers and things. And one of the things I try and tell people about imposter syndrome is that you put your trust in the person who's paying your paycheck. Budget's the most difficult thing, or like the most like, it's very difficult to get budget for something or to get a head count. Like, anyone that's ever hired is like, knows how difficult it is to get that position to hire someone. And so like, when someone hires you, you should trust that they are willing to put their budget in you, right? And when you find out that someone is no longer willing to do that, it sucks, because it's like, oh, what have I done wrong that has meant that they don't have the budget for me anymore? Because that's different to saying like to not passing probation or something, because you at least can point to like, oh, I messed up here and there and that kind of thing. Or like when someone says, actually, we need to, this isn't working, our relationship, our work styles aren't gelling. Like, there's something you can point to. This is the problem. When you're laid off, it very much feels like, oh, I'm not worth that money, which is a very capitalistic way of looking at it. It's a very capitalistic industry. And like, oh, I am no longer worth that salary,
Right.
Which sucks. It's really not a good feeling.
Again, it's a very capitalistic line of thinking, but exactly like you said, it's very easy to point when you're fired for disobedience or something not fleshing. You're not performing, and you're let go as a result of that.
Yeah,
it's incredibly easy to take a look and say, well, I just wasn't performing, or like, I didn't show up for work like 3 weeks in a row. Yeah, it makes sense. I don't have a job there anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's got to be a lot more, I guess, crippling of a feeling to be doing everything, be performing consistently. You're showing up, you're putting the work in, you're doing good, and you're still, not fired, but fired, and there's nothing you can point it to.
It feels very impotent, I think, is a way that is the word, because like, there's nothing you can do. Like, you can't improve yourself. You can improve yourself, but you can't like if I was working better, it still would have happened. You can't I think that's the thing about the consultancy process for me specifically. Was when I went into that, it's like they've already decided they're going to cut my position. It just feels like a wasted time. It feels very much like there's nothing you can do, and it feels and I don't know if this is just a masculine male thing, because like you want to fight, you want to put yourself, you want to like, I can fix this.
Yeah,
it's the thing that I want to fix everything. But it feels very much like you can't fix it. You can't do anything. It's a foregone conclusion. And it's I know I keep saying it's just a bad feeling. It just doesn't feel good to be like, there's nothing I could have done about this. And I think people say that in like, there's nothing you could have done. It's like, true, but that makes it feel worse.
Right. How did you navigate, because we're talking about this, I'm assuming you felt some of it. How do you navigate that feeling in the months after being laid off?
Gosh, so I think I was very lucky in that I have found contract work since then, which, and so like I pretty much in the next, and I said very much immediately, like, I want to take a couple of weeks to, enjoy that I'm here with my partner, enjoy my 30th birthday. But I did have people reaching out to me say, hey, we want to work with you, which is very good, and that helped a lot, and I'm very privileged and lucky to have had that situation, which I think working in PR specifically, like, it is a networking based thing. I'm very lucky that I did find, consultancy work very quickly. But the thing is, like, I am still managing it. Like, I'm very much struggling with that. Like, in fact, the GDC just happened, and like, I wasn't there. I had a GDC talk approved and scheduled and written that I had to cancel because I wasn't able to go to GDC. I wasn't able, I was laid off. I couldn't justify spending the money. And I was going to go with, I think the plan was for me to go with Thunderful, and I wasn't able to justify that cost. And it's just like one of those things. It's just like you have to. It's very difficult to not feel despondent, I think, because like stuff changes, and like you don't just in the industry altogether like, oh, we did a GDC talk, it's really nice, and it's like, yeah, but I was supposed to be there, right? And it is very privileged to me to be able to say like, oh, I was supposed to be at GDC, because I know there's a lot of people that would probably benefit more than me to be at GDC, and I want there to be a more accessible, better place, and I do plan on releasing that talk at some point, because to my own horn, I think I'm very good at my job and my talking to people. But like, it sucks to see people's like, to see that Thunderful still had people at GDC, despite the layoffs. Yeah. I don't have the answer to how I'm dealing with it, how you deal with it, because I don't know if I have. I feel despondent and betrayed and quite lonely, because I have colleagues at my consultancy job, but like I've done them for like 3 weeks now.
Those feelings are absolutely valid, and it is unfortunate and frustrating that we are seeing that happen kind of on the mass scale that we have. Again, in the past year, 20,000 people affected. And so that means there's 20,000 people dealing with these feelings as well, which to me doesn't point towards any kind of sustainable industry. That points to burnout, a huge mass exodus, potentially, of a workforce that's talented. I am happy to hear that you have found contract work, and I'm sorry to hear about the feelings that are still being brought up, still relevant for you.
Oh, I think the thing with the 20,000 people that have been laid off is that the thing, like, I am trying to find work for friends. I've seen lots of people that have been looking for a while, and the thing, this is going to sound very selfish, the thing which makes it hurt even more is that when you're laid off, when you're looking for a job regularly, like, you are competing with other people that are looking for that job to move from the previous job, trying to break into the industry. But when you're laid off and you see 20,000 other people laid off, and there's probably a number of like how many PR people have been laid off, how many marketeers have been laid off, you're not just competing with the people which are trying to break into the industry or trying to apply for a new job, you're also competing with people which have been laid off. And it feels really bad to be up against a friend because you're both trying to find a new role, right? And again, I think I said this when we first started chatting, like, I feel incredibly privileged to have found a role immediately, and like I don't necessarily know if it's my place to talk about this kind of stuff, because I was incredibly lucky, and there's people that I know that have been looking for 6 months, for a year. It just feels really bad. It feels really bad to be someone that is, found work immediately, but also someone that's like was laid off, because there's no. I think the right answer is like negative feelings. You don't say you can't be depressed because that person over there is depressed. But it's like I don't like being a person which is, prioritizing myself over other people, and you have to do that in this situation, because if you're not getting paid, you're not paying rent, and you're not eating.
That's your livelihood gone. And so there does have to be that element of, I wouldn't even call it selfishness. That's just self-preservation at that point.
The thing that I'd most like to get across is like, and again, it's easy to say this from a position of privilege where you found work relatively quickly, and like, but you said it doesn't feel sustainable, and I think I agree, but I think that's a positive for the industry, in that I don't see this. First, like, I think the reason that layoffs are happening to this capacity across the industry is because people made bets during COVID, during the pandemic, that were the right bets to make while loans were cheap and interest rates were low and all that kind of thing. The right bets to make in, 2020, 2021. but now, you know, people can go outside again. People can, and I think the industry is it's going to sound callous, but the industry is correcting back to where it, air quotes, should have been, in a, you know, a traditional kind of like, you know, trend.
If the pandemic hadn't happened, you know,
yeah, like
this
if we
is
didn't
the
have that
evening out of the kind of parabola.
exactly. And I think that sounds callous, and I know there's people I'm talking about, and I feel I'm one of those people, you know. I think it's very easy to say. I think it feels callous to say the industry is overcorrecting. I think it is overcorrected, but I also think the perspective that there's a perspective change towards. Oh no, I think this ideology has been here in the games industry, but I think it is becoming more widespread. This idea that the labor of the people that make the games, the developers make games, and from a perspective, like, I'm a middleman, right? Like, I, you know, press can speak to devs directly. I don't recommend they do because they can't do it, but I, like, my position is as someone who I think in general, like, the people who make the games are learning, like, oh, we can make the games without MBAs. We don't need people here to make these decisions to, you know, look at Embracer, look how terrible that's gone. Yeah. And, like, if they hadn't spent so much money, like, where would the industry be? They haven't been out there buying hundreds of developers and those sorts of things. Where would those studios be now? Like, what about the people at Free Radical? Would they still be making Time Splitters, the Time Splitters remake, or would they still have jobs, that kind of thing?
And you look at the studio that is, I can't remember the name of them, but they're heading up the KOTOR remake, Knights of the Old Republic.
Aspire, yeah.
Aspire. They essentially bought their independence back. And you look at that as a success story because of every other studio under that Embracer umbrella has been hit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I think the industry is in a bad position currently, obviously. But I do think there is a hope that, like, games will be as people do get laid off, and as people realize, like, look at all the new studios that are sprouting up. And I think that, you know, the studios will eventually fail because that's the way that any endeavor happens. But I do think there's going to be a correction to, like, oh, the people that make the games are the people that make games. Steam allows people to get there, and Steam has all of its problems. I know that someone's going to hear me say that and say, "Oh, Steam's not perfect." Like, yeah, Steam's not perfect. I could sit here and talk about the ways the review system could be reworked for hours, but like, Steam means you can probably self-publish. You can have, you know, you can go and, like, PR, and luckily for me, PR is a very cheap way of getting my word out about your game, as opposed to content creators. In the same way that, like, YouTube means that people can, or I'm not a movie person, but, like, there's platforms for people to make movies to get movies out to audiences without having to go through the big studio framework. I also think there's a place for games to do that, and I think that is where the games is going to go. And I think that in 10 years we're going to look at a very healthy industry that doesn't have to rely on Embracer or whomever. And, you know, all opinions said by James Bartholomeou in this opinion and this are not representations of Renaissance PR or whomever, you know. But, like, I think there's going to be a healthy place where the industry doesn't need. Those people will still be around because they're you know, they're titans. Like, you're not going to see EA shut down in 3 days. There's going to be a place where the industry can be healthy, and I see that coming. And it's going to have to go through changes because the industry is changing. But I think there is hope, and I think the industry is going to be in a good place in 5-10 years.
Yeah. And I'd love to talk about this a little bit more too, because you've seen past success stories, things like games that come out of, I guess, a subscription model or Patreon support, Kickstarters, like Kentucky Route Zero, Psychonauts 2, indie developers like Kitty Horror Show, who did things like Anatomy. You are kind of seeing that shift happening even in the space around people who write about games, sites like Aftermath, Min-Max, Respawn, all these independent subscription-based places popping up. Do you think that's kind of the shift that we're going to see more writ large within the games industry?
I think so. I think the media, and I'm not an expert in the media industry, and
neither am I.
It's going to sound. I think lots of people say that the games press are part of the games industry. And I think they're very important to the games industry. They are a separate industry. I think it is a lot easier for someone to say, I'm going to pay £5 a month and I'm going to get access to no ad podcasts, right? Which I do with the Jeff Gersman show and Nextlander. But like there is, I think there's a place for games to do that. I don't think it will be as successful because when you're funding a Patreon for things, like you can expect someone to give out patches every month, and like that doesn't really happen with game. Like you can't make a game every month. And I think some people do. Like Genshin Impact puts out a patch every 2 months, which is like incredible. I think it's going to be, people are going to find ways to put games on, and people have been doing this for years and years and years, like on itch.io and on through the humble DRM store, DRM free store, and all those sorts of things. And I think that's where the industry is going to find its health. The issue is going to be in competition, but that's been an issue for years. I think it's something like there's 100,000 games on Steam now. There's a massive amount of games.
I can never remember the exact figure, but it's either like 1,000 or 10,000 games that are being published on Steam daily. Because take a game and then asset flip it, and just shovelware a bunch of stuff.
Totally. That would have always been an issue, right? Like even if people were getting laid off, there would still be indie studios like, oh, let's make a game. Because people fundamentally always want to play and always want to share ways to play with other people. And like I think the games industry will have always been going this direction. It just means it's going to happen earlier than it would have happened. It's going to be more of a bloodbath. But I think every creative industry is a bloodbath. Like look at how many people self-publish on Amazon, and there'd be like 3 people buy their book, right? I don't necessarily think that's any time around the games industry. I think not to get put. I think that's a great case for universal basic income. That's a whole different conversation.
Right. No, if people have the means to, we don't have to have this whole conversation. But if people have their basic needs taken care of, it enables them to do their passions. They can spend more time making a game to put up on itch, or publish to Steam.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that if the games industry, I do think there's a place that the games industry gets that, and whether that is, through something the universe making, well, you don't have to, where everyone can make what they want to make, or if that is through a place like, maybe someone comes, or maybe this is a good, I don't think this is a good idea, maybe someone comes up with a place where, you can put any game you want in this service, and for every download you get a penny, right? Or like a, indie game pass, whatever. Like, there's going to be a place for people to make. There's always going to be a place for people to make games, and I think there is always going to be an industry which will support those people. It's just going through a bad place now, where the people making the decisions don't make games, and they are the people which are like There's been issues with quality of games in some places. There's been issues with, I think actually this is a great example. Like Dragon's Dogma 2 came out yesterday, and I'm looking at the Steam page right now, and I should buy Dragon's Dogma 2.
And it's got long list of DLC.
Exactly. Yeah. And the people that made that decision are not the people who make games. And I think there is, there's and you can easily say that marketers aren't developers, and that's a whole other conversation as well. But like the person which said, let's put in a 90 pence DLC which restores players, like they're not people who make games. I don't care what you say. The person who made that decision is like, we can squeeze money out of laziness. Those people are the ones which are going to eventually leave creative industries, like, because they're the ones which are trying to rinse money out of people. And once the industry is in a place where it doesn't need to rinse money out of people just to make itself, just to make games sustainable, that is when the games industry and all creative industries, board games or movies or comics or manga or anime or whatever. Once the industry gets to a place that can sustain the ability for people to make games and just be like, I made a game and it sold to 6 people and that feels great, and they can do that without putting their livelihoods on the line, the games industry will be in a good place. And I think there is a place in 10 years that is going to come to. And so I have hope, but again, also it's easier for me to have hope because I'm able to pay the bills, and I totally understand people that don't have that hope right now because it is tough. Yeah,
it is. I agree. You're not the only one who shared the sentiment throughout the series of, it looks tough right now. It seems bleak. there is hope. There was another conversation where we talked about games are going to go to the people who are making them, working for these big studios, might become more like gig contract workers. Like you might see the Uberification of the games industry for a little bit. You can then also look at the fact that Uber, Airbnb, the gig economy isn't as strong as it used to be. They're also going through a correction, but things will change. Things will always change. You know, the future of games, regardless of the direction it goes in, is a one different than what it is now. And so I love that future that you kind of laid forward, because that seems beautiful, and maybe it seems idealistic, but that's the thing with idealism, is that's the ideal. That's what you should strive to attain. Just because it's idealistic doesn't mean it's bad.
If you're not being idealistic, here's how I feel. It's like, if I feel like I'm not being idealistic, then why try, right? Like the industry, and this is whatever, it's like the game industry in general, it has been through its fair. Like there's a whole thing that happened at Ubisoft a few years ago, and what has been happening at Blizzard with abuse and those things. But I think there's a place where people can make the games they want to make safely. And if you just sit back and say that's not possible, then you're failing the industry. And I just don't want to do that, you know?
Right. Again, idealism is not bad. It should not be the stopping point of a discussion. Someone should not say, that's idealistic, and then that's the end of it, because what's the point? I mean, that is the point. We want...
Totally.
Exactly. To kind of...
You've got to have goals.
Exactly. Idealism is just the process of setting goals. So, absolutely. Set goals. But I do love that future, and I hope that is one of the ones where the industry goes, because that sounds like an exciting future. If people,
fingers crossed,
can make games without having to worry about where necessarily their money for having spent all this time on this game is going to come from, then that sounds like an amazing game. You know, again, you brought up Dragon's Dogma 2. The studio wants to see a return on the suits, the C-suite within the studio want to see a return on that, and so that's why you can pay $5 to unlock the ability to change your character in the customizer earlier than if you just played a couple hours into the game, you know?
Although this is a whole other conversation.
Okay.
the thing that bothers me about that is, and this is entirely, I put a Reddit comment about this earlier on the thread, but the thing that bothers me about that is, and this is me sharing my opinion, and we can move on for this, just how we want to move on. The thing with that is, now that I know there is a monetary value to that thing, the same item in game, when I go to use it, I might be like, oh, but this is worth £1.90. Do I use it now? You know, and I fully appreciate that's how I approach consumables in games, but it's like, this item has a real world value. Should I use it now?
That's,
you know,
you know, any RPG you play, you're like, oh, I don't want to use these potions because I'm going to need them later. And then you get to the end of the game and you have 1,000 potions, you know?
Totally.
It's shifting that from just hoarding unnecessarily to you're hoarding because you're trying to place a real world financial value on it.
Exactly. Which is my issue, entirely my issue. But like I can kind of understand where people are like, no, this doesn't feel great, you know?
Well, yeah, no, I get it. It's the old man or your dad or whatever in the living room guarding the thermostat, because if we turn it down 1 degree, that's going to cost me $5 more. You know, if I use that potion, I'm spending $2 to spend that potion.
Yeah, it's a bit of a false equivalence, what I'm saying, but it's how when I know that I'm going to buy Dragon's Dogma this weekend, and I know that I'm be like, I shouldn't change my character appearance because it's gonna. Because even if I find that item, it's still an item which is going to cost me a pound, which isn't costing me a pound, but it will cost me £1 to replace, potentially.
That's, I don't think that's false equivalence. That makes perfect, total sense to me. To dive back away from Dragon's Dogma 2 specifically, and back at the industry at large, I love that potential future. In the meantime, do you think there is anything that the employees can do currently, at these studios where maybe they are survivors of these layoffs? You know, they were one of the not 1,900 people at Microsoft. What can the people left at Microsoft kind of start doing to protect themselves?
I honestly, I don't know if I have the answer to that.
Okay.
Like, I think the answer is like look out for each other, support each other, support the people that are still there, support the people that are still doing their jobs and that are still trying to push games out because they still have to work, right? And it's difficult. Like I've had to unfollow all the accounts for my old company because it's like, I was seeing their games come out and like I'm really proud of the people that are still there. I'm still in contact with lots of them. But I think supporting the people that are still doing their jobs is important because they didn't get you laid off. The suits did. And I think like it's important to remember that, like, I want to say everyone should find a union. Everyone should work to campaign for better labor laws where they work. Everyone should work to better the games industry at large, but protect yourself from. I think if I was to say, like, what if someone's going to say, hey, my company went through layoffs, what do? I think it's like protect yourself, protect your friends, protect your colleagues, and do the best job you can. Because like, even if you are doing a good job, you could be late. And I think this too. I think I'm excellent at my job, and I got laid off. Protect your friends, protect yourself first and foremost. Do a good job if you can, but don't break yourself over it. And look out for each other. I think look out for each other is my advice.
No, that's
to sound sentimental.
that's great, and that pertinent advice. When a lot of these layoffs are happening unexpectedly or randomly, then that's, like you said, unionization helps to extent. We saw it with Sega of America. I've talked about this even like an episode in the series earlier, but like Sega of America had a union. 61 people were still let go, but you think about what's that number, what could it have been without the union? But just go ahead.
Like IGN, you are currently unionized.
Yeah, the 3 people let go.
Exactly. Yeah, and like I think this is the thing the industry is very bad. It's like you say like you should have unionized. It's like, yeah, but unionization only works if the companies listen to the union. Like, it gives you bargaining power.
Right.
It doesn't do your bargaining for you. And it's like, I think the games industry in general is especially bad at like pithy platitudes. And this is going to sound negative, but I think the industry in general is like, they should have unionized. Join a union. It's like, okay, but what's the actual advice for now? Like, I was just doing the same thing. It's like, look out for each other. Like, what does that mean? What's the concrete steps? And like, I think, one, if I had the concrete steps, I would be a billionaire. But two, like, I think the unions are a good tool in making sure we work for things. But like, and everyone should join a union, because I need to join a union. I've not joined a union yet because I'm an idiot. But I need to join a union. Everyone should do that. But like, stop responding when someone says they got laid off. Stop responding saying that you should unionize, because like, they know that. They don't need to be told that. They need to be told, hey, we've got your back if you need someone to talk to, or we'll help you look over a CV. Like, offer to look over someone's CV if they get laid off. Offer to put them in contact with someone that's hiring. Concrete steps are the way that the industry will get through this, and like supporting each other.
Definitely agree. And I also want to say that as none of the stuff specifically we just talked about with unions should be taken as being anti-union, because they still have their place. They're important tool. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
They are beneficial. They're, like you said, unfortunately not the end all be all. They are going to be incredibly helpful in reducing harm. But again, Sega, IGN, that doesn't mean that the company is completely absolved from any potential wrongdoing because there's a union that
exactly they're not a panacea. They're not a golden arrow. They are a tool that you use to bargain to protect yourselves and bargain for more power.
Yeah, those concrete steps. Reach out to people, see how you can support them. That's the best thing. Yeah.
It's an industry, and industry means that we're peers, and working together is how we do it.
Something I got drilled into my head about when I was going to college and I studied film was that film is a collaborative medium, and games are very much the same way, if not, in a sense, more collaborative. The way we interact with each other outside of our work should reflect that. It should be as collaborative.
Absolutely, yeah.
James, I've enjoyed the chat. I think we've covered a lot. And I've said it a couple times, but I enjoy that kind of envisionment of the future. I truly do hope that that's what the games industry kind of shift towards. As we're kind of winding down, do you have anything that you want to plug, anything you want to point people to?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So I mentioned earlier, I did some pro bono PR work for the Women in Games showcase. I recommend that people go and look at that showcase. It's happened last week, and they should go check out Women in Games, Women Make Games, Women-led Games showcase. Sorry, it's about studios which they are led by women. They're predominantly women, majority women owned. I recommend they go and work with that. Go and look at that. They look at the women-led games in general. There's also a Latin American games showcase, which is put on by the same people, which highlights Latin American made games. So Latin America. Important. I think there's studios across the world which don't get looked at very often. Certainly studios outside North America and Europe and Japan that we need to look at further. And I think that the Latin America Games Showcase is a great example of that. I'd also like to point people towards two shows I've been watching recently. There is Free Aaron, Beyond Journey's End, which is an anime, which is on Crunchyroll, I believe, and is about an elf who is looking at life outside the perspective of someone that's for 1,000 years, and it's one of the best fantasy shows, best fantasy works I've ever read. Ever watched. It is brilliant. And also, I would like to plug Delicious in Dungeon Meshi, which is on Netflix, I believe, and is similarly, it's an anime, and it is about a group of 4 people which are going into a dungeon to rescue one of their sisters, and it is all about dungeon ecology and world building and how you cook monsters, and is likewise one of the best fantasy works I have ever read. I'd like to put people towards those things, and also, like I said earlier, support each other.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I have always taken the time at the end of the episode here to plug the Games Industry Job Hunt Slack channel. I'm not directly affiliated with it, but I've seen it floating around a lot and just want to point people towards as a great resource. It's a community focused on providing job hunting resources to those impacted by a layoff or reduction in workforce within the games industry. I'll put the link for that below, as well as AmirSatvat.com, which Amir has put together a website with all kinds of resources ranging from hiring, visibility, support postings, coachings, career planning. Looks like there's a LinkedIn group in there as well that you can join. Just another great resource if you've been affected by the layoffs. And that is about it. James, anything else that we want to cover?
I don't think so. No, I really appreciate your time today, Perry. It's been great meeting you. Been really fun to talk about this kind of thing. Thank you for letting me get some anger out here.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for not only making the schedule and time zone differences work, but thank you for being on and being willing to share your experience with this. Again, it's the thing that these are stories, and we share them, and hopefully are able to highlight the wins, the struggles of the industry, and this point in history. People are going to look back on this, and so we want to give them a good record.
One final thing, if it's okay for me to say, is if you are working in PR or you want to break into PR, find me on Twitter. I think the lower third says my Twitter thing. Find me, reach out to me, and I will get back to you. Always happy to help. Always happy to give advice. That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome of you, James. I'm sure people appreciate that. with that, we're here at the end of the episode. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Perry Gottschalk. My social is at the bottom of my image here. The same with James here. I've been Perry. This has been James Bartholomeou. Thank you for watching Played Off. Have a great day.